Hey, it's Ben here. We're just about to start another tutorial with our image of green Tara. We're up to doing some work on the more work on the shading today, as well as a little bit of fast forward action of the highlights and the shadows, so you can see quickly what happens in the shading process. It takes many hours, so I can't obviously show you the whole thing, so I'm just going to speed it up so that you can see things happening a bit more quickly. But before we start, I thought you might like to see the place where I'm staying at the moment, the place where I've been doing retreat and painting for the last 4 months. So I showed part of this area before. This is my yurt where I stay. Down here you can see my bike. That's how I get back here. When I go down to collect my food, I take the bike and get all the way back to the top. It's about a 20-30 minute walk down to the bottom where the caretakers leave my food. So sometimes I feel like that's a little bit much, so I take the bike and it makes it a little bit easier. As you can see, I'm up the top of a very, well, for Australian standards, quite a large hill. So here's the yurt. I showed you this in another video, but let's go inside. So come on in. Whoa, it's hard to find that doorknob. Here we are. So I built this a number of years ago with the help of a number of people. And as you can see, we never quite finished it, but that's fine. I don't mind it that way, you know. It's hard being in such a remote location to get motivated to do any building. So because anything that you want to do, you have to carry all the way up the hill. So we kind of got to this stage, and that's where it stayed. So I'm just panning around. So there's the kitchen, you can see. Just cooking some eggs up for lunch. Here to the left is that's the hot water heater. So the solar panels, solar hot water system outside collects hot water and pumps through the building into here, and that acts as like a kind of a radiator during winter. So it's about 200 litres of hot water, and it keeps it really actually quite warm. Behind here you can see this is the spaghetti works that operates the hydronic hot water heater, and it basically distributes the hot water between the radiator here and the floor inside the meditation room, which is heated. So the kitchen is a reasonably recent addition. Of interest to you maybe is where I do some work. So if I've been working on images, this is my little sort of temporary workstation I just put together. That's Wacom Cintiq 13 HD, and then my Mac keyboard and mouse, and then that just connects to my MacBook Pro, and that's where I paint. I made that little board. It makes it much easier to work with the Cintiq. It's much more ergonomic to have a larger surface area to rest your hands and arms while you work. It's hard to work in here. The glare is really difficult. Being a yurt, it has a huge skylight, and that's a little cover that I made that stops, or tries to stop the moon from shining on your face in the middle of the night, but it's not ideal for working on a computer screen, as you can imagine. That's about it. So down here, this is my bed. It's my chair for relaxing, and that's the heater. If it gets very cold, I turn that heater on. It's a kerosene heater, which I really don't recommend for anyone. They're not great for your health, and they produce a lot of carbon monoxide, so it's really only there just as a temporary measure when I need it. And then underneath my feet is the yoga mat, and then a nice rug. So you can see it's quite a small room. It's 4.5 metres across. That's looking backwards to the door. So I'm just finishing up 4 months now. I've got about a week to go and starting to pack up and sort of move back into the outside world. So I'm just cleaning up at the moment, but Before I packed everything up, I just wanted to show you guys around. Here's my meditation room. So this is where I do my practice. So you can't quite see, it's dark there, but this is going into the rammed earth structure, which is added a little bit later. It's 2.4 meters in diameter. There's my meditation cushion. And there's the roof. It's got some groovy lights that are, you probably can't see, but they're in the round windows, have LED lights in them, and then there's a string of red lights, which I quite like, at the top. The floor is, I was a bit of a hippie when I built this, so the floor is an earth floor with lime, like a natural earth floor, and it has the heating running through it. So I'm very, very happy with the floor. It came out absolutely beautiful. It's sealed with tung oil, if any of you are builders. And then the walls are whitewashed. And inside, I have a little thermometer here which tells me what the temperature is, but at the moment it's saying 20 degrees, and outside it's about 25. But on a hot day, if it was 30 degrees outside, it would still be about 20 degrees in here. So it's made the usability of this space much more sort of all year round, whereas before you could really only do a retreat here in winter, being a hot Australian climate. That's back to the door. So the windows, if you want to know, they're just formed concrete inside the rammed earth. And then it's dead silent when you shut the door. It's completely silent in here. And I don't know if we can see, we can't. The little Vajra lock I have on the door. There's my little table with my sadhana. If I'm doing that kind of retreat, this has been a Mahamudra retreat, so it's been mainly just sitting on the cushion. And then back to the altar, and that's the way I look, facing to the west. As you can see, I'm just packing stuff up now, so the paintings are down, and turn the thangkas around so that you know, if people come to visit, they don't see the deities that are being practiced. Okay. So that's about it. So let's go to look at some painting now. I don't know, I think we're almost, by the time this video is over, we'll be probably, I'd be guessing we're about 70% through the painting. So it's really just endurance now. It's getting through all the shading. In this particular thangka, there's lots of things to shade. The water's pretty simple, but there's a lot of leaves and flowers and different things. And I want to add some gold highlights, I think, to the robes that Green Tara is wearing. So there's a lot of extra work, but it'll make for a good video. So the process will go on. I think now for probably I think I'll be finished in about a month. So we'll have at least 5 or 6 more videos, I think. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you're enjoying the series, and I hope you're learning something from it. Okay, bye. Okay, so here we are painting away. The last tutorial that I recorded, we just started doing this highlight section in the water that's surrounding the stem of the lotus. I was using a technique with the smudge tool, and I think I wasn't really happy with the results I was getting, so I abandoned the smudge tool and I've now gone to the brush, and I think it's probably a better method. It seems to be a little bit easier to control. So if you're following along, you can ignore what I said in the last tutorial using the smudge tool, but occasionally you'll see me use the smudge tool just as it's needed with this method that I'm working on here. But again, it's up to you to choose the method that suits you. Here, all I'm doing is just really doing very basic brush work with a completely opaque brush. Oh, sorry, it's not opacity's at 50%, and it's just starting to rain. So I'm going to move somewhere that's a little bit more quiet because the the yurt that I'm in is quite loud, and there's also a thunderstorm coming at the moment as well. So I'm going to go and hide from that, because here at the top of the mountain where I'm staying, it tends to attract a bit of lightning, and I always end up cowering in the meditation room, worrying about being hit by lightning. A couple of months ago, lightning struck a tree about 20 metres from my yurt, and it completely destroyed it. It was maybe a 200-year-old tree, and it just blew it to pieces. And it was one of the most beautiful trees up here, so I was sad to see that tree go. But yeah, so this place does attract lightning. So anyway, here we are. We're adding our highlights. As I said, it's just a matter of laying down, in this case, white, and using the soft light blend mode, which is the mode that I always use for shading, to make those white pixels blend into whatever's below them. So here, just experimenting with the line to see how I'm going, turning it on and off. Now to the bottom of the water. So again, I've just laid down areas of white, and then refining it with the eraser tool to get it to where I want. If you look in my layers palette, you'll notice that I've got 3 layers or more, and I alternate between those layers, so you don't, as you're using the eraser tool, you don't bump into something that you've already painted. And then those layers are just flattened or merged to keep the number of layers manageable. So here, just trying to work out the areas that I think will be receiving light and should be rendered as light in tone. And this little area here is a little bit tricky, so you'll see me play around with this a little bit. And I think I use this, yeah, okay, so here's the smudge tool. So there, the smudge tool was just what was needed. So here, back to the brush and eraser technique. I think a little bit of smudge tool then. And then once the general pattern of highlighting or is laid down, then I refine it in a general way with the opacity of the layer, but also more subtly, which is what I'm doing here. I take a large soft eraser tool that's set to a very low opacity, in this case 20%, and just refine the overall structure of that rendering. So there we go, I've merged all of that together to one layer now. Just adding the outline. So here it looks like I'm colorizing the outline just to try and work out what tonal value I want the outline to be, or whether I actually want it at all. And I'm thinking now I may try and, a lot of this picture I want to try and complete without the outline. The rocks will definitely have an outline. They generally work best with an outline, but often things like the water and the leaves, and particularly flowers, things that are very gracefully shaded, can do better without an outline. But they're decisions that are made right at the end of the process. Okay, so it looks like here we're onto the leaves. So I'm selecting the leaf channel. I've got 2 leaf channels. I've got a channel that defines the outer surface of the leaf and a channel that defines the underside of the leaf. And they're generally different colours. Normally the underside of the leaf is lighter and less saturated. So just starting now with the shading for the leaf. And it's exactly the same process. It's just the same thing over and over. I guess the difficulty is deciding which parts are going to be shaded and which parts aren't, so that you're defining that as a three-dimensional object. Again, as if you look over at the layer palette, you can see that I've got 3 layers that I'm working on, and I just, as I said, I alternate between them just so that you're not erasing into areas that you've already painted. And it saves you making, extra selections, for example, to try and protect certain areas. So here, this is a reason. There's many leaves that overlap each other, so it's a reasonably complex area here. Once it gets onto the rest of the picture, it becomes much more simple, because each leaf is essentially the same thing over a repeated multiple times, and so the shading it's really just becomes quite robotic in some senses. So just there, I was using a soft eraser just to feather that outline a little bit. At the stage I'm at with this Thangka, where I'm at right now, I'm deciding whether to add things like striations to the leaf. So normally there'd be, the veins that you would see in a leaf are rendered by the artist. I haven't decided whether I'll do that or whether I won't. The other option I'm trying to decide is whether to do gold outlining. So often on the inside of just on the inside of the darker outline, which defines the edge of the leaf, there will be a gold line. I want to have a little bit of gold in this Thangka, particularly in the robes that surround green Tara. So I may do a layer towards the end of gold outlining. In a traditional Thangka, that would definitely be the case. The very last thing that the artist does is the gold leafing. You just saw me go across to iTunes there, so I'm listening to some very beautiful Renaissance music there, which is very good for the mind when you're doing art. They say Renaissance and Baroque classical music is very good for your mind, good for learning. So here, just working my way up. Normally the first half hour is fairly difficult when you're shading something, but then once you get into a bit of a rhythm and you start to recognise the shapes that you're trying to define, it gets easier and quicker. And so it's different. So when you do the water, the first bit of time you'll spend on the water will be difficult, but then once you work out exactly what you're doing, it becomes easy. So here I remember I was working pretty hard because this is the first leaf rendering I've done for quite a while. But it gets easier. When you're a beginning artist, when you're just starting out, it's a lot of work to do this, because you have to constantly be thinking about what part of the rendering needs to be higher and what needs to be lower, what needs to be shaded, what needs to receive light, what needs to be to be added to define the shape of what you're trying to render, and that is quite hard. You might spend quite a lot of time actually looking at the image, trying to work out exactly where it should be shaded. Clouds can be particularly difficult sometimes. And I'll also admit, I mean, often you do the drawing and then when it comes to rendering, you find that there's lines in the drawing that you don't actually know what they are. For some reason you drew them at the time they made sense, but when it comes to rendering, there might be a line and it doesn't even seem to relate to anything. And so you can spend quite a bit of time scratching your head over that. And I think the hardest is sometimes the robes, in particular the scarf. If the scarf is very complex and twists and folds over itself many times, it can be very hard to work out what's going on. And it's cool to look at once you start copying Thangkas, you can see that you're not alone in that struggle. Many times you look at it, if you look at a Thangka, I mean, no one looks at them as closely, right? If you're an artist, you look at them very, very closely, particularly if you're copying work. And you can actually see where the artists in the past have made similar mistakes. They've drawn lines that don't end up going anywhere. So I always find that quite amusing when that happens. And their minds are the same as ours. It's quite amusing to me anyway. So rendering's progressing, starting to get some nice three-dimensional shapes here. Everything's very monochromatic at the moment in the leaves. It's really just one colour and a darker version of that. If you want your Thangkas to look good, you have to really try and avoid that. It's a very easy mistake to or trap to fall into with digital painting, because things can be so easy and quick just to make everything one colour. But if you look at a hand-painted Thangka, the leaf has a lot of variation in colour within it. It might go to a more yellow tone, or there are more saturated areas, less saturated areas. The stem will be a different colour to the rest of the leaf, for example. Whereas here you can see the stem that I'm drawing has no different colour. It's just everything is the same all over. So once the rendering's done and I have some time, then I go through and start creating colour variation in the leaf. I don't do it in the beginning normally. It can become a little bit overwhelming. I like to define the shape of the object before I start doing any subtlety in colour. But that's just the way I work. So I think there's something popped up that said this was 3 times. This is at 300%, so this is going 3 times quicker than I actually draw. So just looking at the video timeline here, the actual painting here is looks like it's taking up about 30 minutes. So this is an hour and a half of painting that you're looking at. Which is the incredible thing about digital, right? If you were doing this by hand, this would be, potentially months of work. One of the things that I think we look at the very end of this video is Can you hear the thunder? One of the things we look at towards the end of this video is the subtlety of the colour in the shaded areas. So not generally a rule of thumb for rendering shadows accurately is that the shadow areas should have a cooler tone, and the highlight areas should have a warmer tone. So for example, you would be making a colour adjustment here to create shadows. I'm just painting with black, but really I should be painting with a very, very dark blue. But that's an adjustment we can make later, and you'll see me experiment with that towards the end of the video. It's a subtle thing, but it's just a tiny little bit of cool tone in the shaded areas. It becomes very important when, I've noticed it's most important when painting the very darker coloured deities, particularly red coloured deities. If you just have a really monochromatic red, it never looks good. And red's very dark tonally too, so I always really struggle to paint the red deities. But if you start adding colour variation in the shadows and the highlights by making the shadows cooler, which means they'll go a bit more towards purple and the highlights will go a little bit more towards yellow, then you start getting beautiful colour value, and you really brings life into the skin of the deity. Okay, so there's my leaf rendering. So just moving towards the last sort of 7 minutes of the video. You can see there that I haven't actually selected the channel, so I'm painting outside of the channel for the leaf. So I just deleted all that work, and here you'll see me over in the channel palette selecting leaf surface. So often you can do that. You can be painting away for quite a while, and you don't really realise where your brushwork is going into areas that you don't necessarily want it to go. But you can see the incredible power of having the channels that you don't, at any moment you can select an area that you want to paint inside, and you can work only in that area. So it really saves you a lot of time. Otherwise, you'd have to be erasing, outside of the leaf area all the time. Another way you can do it, when one of the artists I learned from, they use the channel method, which is the one that I use, but they also use the magic wand. So that particular artist would select with not the magic wand, the lasso tool. He would select the area that he wanted to shade with the lasso tool. And he'd just work on a tiny little area at a time. I don't like that method for Thangkas because you have to be very accurate to be able to draw along the middle of the line. And it's very tiring to have to draw that accurately for 10 or 12 hours a day. Meaning when you're making the selection, the selection has to be accurate to within half of the width of the line. And that's hard to achieve. So here you can see I'm going heaps quicker because now we're out of the difficult area, and all of these leaves are essentially the same as one another. They're just different variations of the same leaf shape, except for that one I'm working on now. That's a bit of an oddball. So now we're moving up to a fairly unusual leaf shape, which is obscured on the left hand side of the screen below the channels palette at the moment, but that one I had a little bit of difficulty rendering because it's not a shape that I'm used to seeing, so it's a little bit takes a little bit of time to work out exactly how that should be shaded. We'll get up to it in a second. We're 2 leaves away from it. As you can see, this is always just the same general pattern. These little buds that you see here, I'm not going to paint them. They're really just there as placeholders. I'll do those separately on a different file because those I don't want to have any outline. I want them to be very delicate. So I just really drew them very roughly as placeholders. But yeah, as I said, I'll take care of those as a separate file. And then I can keep that file for later use. I can reduplicate those lotus buds whenever I need them, which is a really handy thing to do. I have a separate folder which is called individual elements or something like that. And they're all the things that I reuse over and over. Okay, so here's the unusual leaf shape. So this one I wasn't really sure what to do. So now I'm flattening, and I've just made some more layers, and these layers are to add like a more gross level of shading. So you can hear I'm using a very big brush, and what I'm doing is I'm shading not the individual aspects of a leaf, but the way a leaf is shaded by a leaf that's on top of it, if that makes any sense. So before I was working on the individual aspects of a single leaf, but here I'm taking whole areas that are going to be shaded by higher areas. And this can be a little bit more tricky sometimes. Okay, so I think that's looks like all the work I was going to do. So here, so now we're looking at, I'm just doing a little experiment to adjust the color temperature of the shaded areas. So what I'm doing is I'm using the colorize feature in the hue and saturation dialog box to just turn that black color that I've been painting with to a very, very dark blue or aqua by the looks of what I've selected there. You can see I've got saturation turned up to 100%, so you want it as saturated as possible. And you only want to lighten it by about 2%, maybe 5%. Okay, so that's the end of it. I'll go through that that colouring process later. I was really just doing a little bit of an experiment there. But in a future tutorial, when I get around to finishing off this image, we'll look at adjusting the colour temperature of the shadow and highlight areas. So that's it for now. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed a little tour of my meditation space and my the place where I do art. Wishing you good painting, happy times, and yeah, I hope your practice is going well. Take care.